Hello. Thank you so much for inviting us. And Tatiana, thank you so much for inviting me. And I have incredible stage fright, and I realize, I think, because I feel like I'm like some kid who was just handed an acoustic guitar and told that he was opening up for Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen. So, so I'm a little bit jittery. But having said that, I think one of the things that all of us are very interested in, and something that I'm very interested in personally, what I want out of art is developing ways of seeing. So what I want out of art is things that help us see the historical moment that we're living in. When I say help us see that, I mean that actually quite literally. And that's a very particular definition of what I want out of art that doesn't encompass, what, art is in some meta sense or something like that. I don't really worry about that so much. It's just kind of what I want. And I've done a lot of different kinds of projects, but today really I want to focus on projects that have to do with secrecy and with looking at military and intelligence agencies and military and intelligence activities that are around us all of the time, but which are usually constructed in such a way as to be invisible to our everyday senses. And when I say they're invisible, I mean that both literally and figuratively as well. I often say that learning how to see secrecy, learning how to see military and intelligence programs is akin to being like an astronomer, trying to learn about some of the universe's more exotic features indirectly, because some of the strangest things in the universe, things like dark matter and dark energy, are things that we actually can't see directly. And so a big of the part of the job of the astronomer or cosmologist is to develop indirect ways of trying to detect things that we can't see in a direct way, in a straightforward way. And so I use that as a metaphor, but I also use the idea, like the idea of astronomy also comes up quite literally in some of the work that I've done. And one way that that's come up is having to do with like going out and when we're talking about seeing secrecy, I think about secrecy as always congealing into the Earth's surface. In other words, I don't think about secrecy as a kind of abstract idea about what you get to know and what you don't get to know. I think about it as a series of, physical and legal and social and cultural and economic institutions. And as such, it is, made out of the same stuff that the rest of the world looks like. And there's a fundamental contradiction in secrecy as far as I understand it, because although the kind of organizing logic of secrecy is one of invisibility and one of silence, at the moment where the stuff that constitutes secrecy is made out of the same stuff that the rest of the world is made out of, there's a contradiction right there, because things in the world reflect light. So if you're going to build a secret airplane, for example, you can't build it in an invisible factory. You have to build it in a factory that looks like anything else in the world. And by exploring these kinds of contradictions between materiality and secrecy, this is kind of methodologically what animates a lot of my work. So one body of work has to do with very basically going out and trying to see and photograph classified places, black sites or secret Air Force bases and this kind of thing. And what's difficult about this is oftentimes, if you think about a classified air base, it's going to be way out in the middle of the desert with nothing around it. You can't get anywhere near some of these infrastructures. So I've quite literally, to come back to this astronomy idea, begin using tools designed for astronomy and astrophotography, in other words, telescopes, to try to take landscape photos of places that are very, very far away. So for example, if we have a kind of more classical kind of Ansel Adams photo here taken with something like a 50 millimeter lens, what would happen if instead you used a 5,000 millimeter lens that was designed to take pictures of different galaxies and looked at, something in the desert that way? Well, you would start to see that your landscapes would emerge that would be maybe a little bit unexpected. the NSA installation in West Virginia. This is a downlink for reconnaissance satellites in New Mexico. This is a classified airbase in Nevada. This image is taken from about 18 miles away. And so what you're beginning to see with some of these images, they're starting to fall apart. And the reason they're starting to fall apart is that I'm looking through so much heat and so much haze that the physical properties of light itself are beginning to come undone. And so in a very real way, when we're looking at like an image like this, which is taken from about 44 miles away, these are chemical and biological weapons proving grounds in Utah. This is a photograph of a secret place, but it's also a photograph of what it looks like when you push the physical properties of vision as far as they will go. And the physical properties of vision begin to collapse, quite literally. Around 60 miles, you get something completely abstract. And this is something that I'm interested in, like pushing these visualization and these seeing technologies past the point where our eyes work, pushing them to the point where visibility itself begins to break down and become a kind of abstraction. So I'm interested in this collapse in this kind of direction. But I think that when we look at secret military and intelligence programs and covert actions, there's also a different kind of collapse what happens as well. Not only a collapse into everyday life, but over and over we find a kind of collapse into everyday life. I got very interested in how the logistics of various covert operations work. So if you are running some kind of global covert infrastructure, how do you maintain it? How do you reproduce it? How do you get it to operate? And I was very interested in how the CIA's rendition and secret prison program was working. This is the program where they had secret prisons across the world and were disappearing people into them. And I started to think about what the footprint of this kind of global geography might have. What would be all the moving parts that you would need in order to run a secret prison system around the world? And I got very interested in airplanes because it seemed to me, and a number of other journalists and human rights researchers, that airplanes would be a crucial part of running the logistics of an operation like this. And so to make a really, really long story short, the trick was, again, to try to find the contradictions in the system. What are the places in which a secret covert operation would intersect something in the world that I could see? And in this case, those intersections would happen over and over again in the form of bureaucracies. So for example, one of the things that I thought was, if I was running CIA covert operations around the world, I would do it through front companies, which is, I'm sure everybody's familiar with that idea. But there'd be a couple of things that I'd want to do with the airplanes that I was running through front companies that would be unusual. And one of the things I'd want to be able to do, for example, is land at military air bases around the world. So I asked the Army for a list of what are all the names of civilian companies who have clearances to land at military airfields, and what airfields do they have clearances to land at. And on a list like that, you find people that you would expect. UPS, DHL, FedEx, who mostly have clearances to land within the United States. But as you get further into the document, some strange things appear. You find outfits like this: Stevens Express Leasing, who have a worldwide clearance. They can land at any military airbase anywhere they want in the world. Richmore Aviation, again, a worldwide clearance. Rapid Air Trans, Path Corporation, Premier Executive Transport Services, all these very strange sounding names of companies that can fly wherever they want. Premier Executive Transport Services in particular would turn out to be really one of the workhorses of this rendition program. And because these are fake companies, but even though they're fake companies, they have to file all the same kinds of paperwork that any other company has to file. So there's articles of incorporation and so on and so forth. So you can start to find things like letterheads, who has their address on it. This is the headquarters of Premier Executive Transport Services in this nondescript building outside of Boston. It's right above a place called the Sovereign Bank, for those of you political theory Carl Schmitt fans.
I used to have an account there.
Really?
Yeah, the government closed it. That's funny.
The sign outside says Hill and Plakius attorneys. These are a couple of divorce lawyers. Why do they have a fake CIA company incorporated at their address? I don't know, and when I went in there and asked them, they threw me out. But I got really interested in the people associated with this company and others. Colleen Bornt, Brian Dice, Tyler Edward Tate. Got obsessed about collecting their signatures wherever I could find them. As you can imagine, if you haven't figured this out yet, Tyler Edward Tate's not a real person. Tyler Edward Tate has a birthday in the 1950s, but a social security number from the 1990s, no credit history, none of the electronic records that really you or I create every day in our lives, every few minutes, actually. Yeah, but by locating these companies, you could go, you could find out what, if you had a company name like Premier Executive Transport Services, you could say, okay, we'll go to the FAA and say, hey, the FAA, I'd like to know what's the registration numbers and serial numbers of all the airplanes that Premier Executive Transport Services owns. So you get a list of registration numbers. When you have a list of registration numbers, you can go back and say, here's a list of registration numbers of airplanes. I'd like to have copies of all the flight plans that they have on file with you guys. They have to file a flight plan. And again, these are all documents that are in the public domain because these are civilian companies. Right? They have to play by the same rules that other companies have to play by. To make a very, very long story short, a collaborator and I, an investigative journalist named A.C. Thompson, spent time running all over the world, tracking down the places where these different airplanes had flown, and were eventually led to a series of secret prisons in Afghanistan. This is one that was called the Salt Pit, and this is another one that I don't know the name of. But not only do I don't only just use imaging tools like I showed in these landscape photographs. I'm really interested in these kinds of archives that we looked at just now with this bureaucratic refuse, whether that's the letterheads of fake companies or other things. And one of the kind of little bits of almost like archival dark matter of covert operations that I've been very, very interested in is the uniform patches for military projects. And many, many years ago, I was very, very surprised to learn that the military makes patches for what they call black projects. In other words, if you're a uniformed officer and you're working on a secret project, there's a patch on your uniform for the secret project. And this is one of the most bizarre forms of art that you'll ever run across. You find things like this. This is a This is the Special Projects Flight Test Squadron. This is a group of test pilots. All they do is fly secret airplanes, right? That's all they do. And they fly out in the middle of the desert, and their mascot is this wizard. And all of these symbols mean things. Like the bottom, we have this radar, and then this sword actually refers to a classified airframe that they flew. The ball falling out of the sky is a radar calibration target that you use to tune a radar. The wizard's holding a staff, and a lightning bolt is coming out of the staff. The lightning bolt represents electronic warfare. And in his hand, he's holding this lowercase sigma symbol, which means in the kind of engineering language of designing stealth airplanes, it signifies invisibility. So here's another outfit. And this one is funny as well. This is for a reconnaissance satellite, a signals intelligence satellite. It's represented by this dragon, and the arrow represents the satellite going off into space. The cobra represents a sensor, probably called cobra brass. Now we have this Latin inscription here. All your base are belong to us. You can't make this stuff up, right? But you know, astronomy again comes back over and over again. I've been very interested in looking up at the night sky and like an astronomer and kind of photographing and trying to understand what I think of as the other night sky. What are the other kinds of strange objects that are in the heavens above us that we don't understand very well? And I've developed a lot of techniques for tracking and photographing classified spacecraft and spy satellites. And this is done by using observational data from a network of amateur astronomers around the world who go out every night with binoculars and telescopes and look for things in the night sky that shouldn't be there and put together numbers like this describing the observation. So when you get this observational data, again, we find a contradiction in this world of secrecy. You're making a secret satellite in space that doesn't exist, but that object still has to follow Kepler's laws of planetary motion. So if you can see the object a couple times, you can literally use early 17th century mathematics to very accurately describe its orbit. And when you can do that, you can make predictions about where an object might be. When you can make a prediction, you can go out and photograph it. So this, for example, the streak moving through this image is something called an enhanced crystal system satellite. Think about the Hubble Space Telescope, which is out looking at the depths of the universe and discovering all these wonderful things. Well, there's many, many more Hubble Space Telescopes, but they're all pointed down at Earth, and this is one of them. The Air Force a couple of years ago, they've been flying over and again. They built a drone version of the space shuttle, a thing called the X-37B, which is now on its third mission. They don't really want to talk about it that much. They fly it out of Vandenberg Air Force Base. But we've been tracking this one as well, and that's the drone space shuttle flying through the air. They have a patch. The X-37. And this is the program office that runs the place. It's an outfit called the Rapid Capabilities Office. The back of their patch has this black world, yuck, yuck. And their little motto here is doing God's work with other people's money. And now you see strange things in the sky when you start to look closely. There was a spacecraft launched in January of 2009, a spacecraft called USA 202, which probably has a code name called Orion. And this thing was, it was going on a Delta IV Heavy rocket. You could kind of tell based on the launch configuration, this is going to be something big and something, there's going to be something very weird about this. So this rocket launches, goes up, delivers a payload over the Eastern Hemisphere. And I actually had to go to South Africa to photograph this thing here. But this is what it shows up like. This pretty bright line here. You know, that's a big spacecraft. This is about 24,000 miles away, 36,000 kilometers away. So to be that bright, you're really big. And at first I saw that, I was like, okay, cool. I was able to photograph USA 202. And then I looked up, okay, well, what's this thing that is like this little thing right in front of it? Well, that's something called Thuraya 2. And Thuraya 2 is a communication satellite that handles all the satellite telephone and satellite data for the Middle East. Pretty funny to look up in the sky, and there is this giant American signals intelligence satellite sitting right behind the communication satellite that handles much of the traffic for the Middle East. No. As a corollary to this, you can look at satellites visually and get their reflections from the sun, but satellites have downlinks. They're delivering data down to Earth, and sometimes you can find interesting things in those downlinks. Some years ago, people were making a little bit of a sport of trying to find American surveillance plane footage on open communication satellite channels, and I got my hands on a bunch of this footage and made a little film about it. Strange things show up in American surveillance feeds from drones and that sort of thing. This is one of the things that shows up is clocks that just go and tick for a while. And so getting interested in drones, I've gone out to the desert a lot in Nevada where most of the drones are flown from Creech Air Force Base, and just driving out just to the middle of the desert and looking up at the sky and photographing the sky. And when you go out there, you kind of have to know where you're going, and you go and you look at the sky, and it takes a minute or two for your eyes to adjust, and then you realize there's all these little bug robot drones flying around, and they come over and look at you, and the whole thing is extremely creepy. And so these images are just photographing the sky, and then when you look closely at the prints, you realize that there's these aircraft in them. And in images like this, in the images of whether it's looking at the sky or whether it's looking at landscapes at a distance or this sort of thing, I always find echoes with other things that artists have seen in the past. So for example, if I look up in the sky and see a Reaper drone, well, other artists in the past have looked up at the sky and seen things like angels. And I'm always thinking about what would this image look like now, and perhaps this image looks something like this now. An image like this is, of course, Turner's rain, steam, speed. When we see an image like this, we tend to think about it as a kind of image of abstraction, but I think that there's actually something much more interesting going on, that perhaps this is actually a photorealistic painting of a world that is sped up beyond your eye's ability to immediately apprehend something. Something similar might be going on with this. And so this is coming back to this pole of abstraction that my work always is kind of going towards over and over again. And on the other hand, this constant tension between that blurriness on one hand and the abstraction on one hand, and on the other hand, things that are so everyday and so banal that they become indistinct and abstract in a different kind of way. And for me, this abstraction of everyday life comes from learning how to notice the ways in which everyday objects and environments have become militarized or weaponized, and the meanings of everyday objects in the visible world have become suspect. A post office becomes a warehouse for the secret identities of covert operators. A fake passport becomes a kind of ticket to conduct clandestine activities overseas. A person standing outside their house, somebody else taking their children to school. People getting off of a plane becomes something with a different kind of meaning when you see it through these eyes. So my point is that we actually don't have to go looking for secret prisons in Afghanistan or classified satellites in the night sky to see covert operations and see state secrecy around us all the time. We don't have to look any further than the everyday objects that we live with every day. And that brings us to Jake.